I was sitting on my back patio on a Tuesday evening in late September, enjoying the crackling fire in my custom-built stone fire pit, when Patricia Hendricks appeared at my back gate like a vulture spotting roadkill. The flames danced against the cooling Arizona air, and I had just opened a cold beer after a long day of managing construction projects across Phoenix. The last thing I needed was another confrontation with the HOA president, who had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable since I moved into this Scottsdale subdivision 3 years ago. "Quincy Voss, I need to speak with you immediately," Patricia announced, her nasal voice cutting through the peaceful evening like nails on a chalkboard. She was already letting herself through my gate without invitation, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair not moving an inch in the breeze, her pristine white pantsuit practically glowing in the firelight. I took a long sip of my beer before responding. "Patricia, trespassing again, I see." "This is HOA business," she sniffed, clutching her tablet to her chest like a shield. "I've received multiple complaints about your fire pit." "Multiple complaints from who exactly?" I asked, knowing full well she probably meant herself, her lackey Susan from 2 streets over, and maybe her hairdresser. "That's confidential," she said primly, her eyes scanning my backyard with obvious disapproval. "But that's not why I'm here tonight. I've been reviewing the community bylaws and the original subdivision plans, and I've discovered something very interesting." I waited, watching the flames and refusing to give her the satisfaction of appearing concerned. Patricia loved dramatic pauses almost as much as she loved citing obscure HOA regulations. "This fire pit," she continued, gesturing at my beautiful stonework with a dismissive wave, "is built on what was designated as community green space in the original 1987 development plans." I actually laughed. "Patricia, you've outdone yourself this time. This is my backyard. I own this property. I have a deed. The original plans clearly show this area as community space," she insisted, tapping on her tablet. "Your backyard extends only to where that oak tree is planted. Everything beyond that, including where you've built this monstrosity, belongs to the HOA." The oak tree she was referring to was a good 15 feet from my fire pit, right at the edge of my covered patio. My fire pit sat another 20 feet beyond that, still well within my fence line. "Patricia, I had a survey done before I built this fire pit 2 years ago. This is all my property." "Surveys can be wrong," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I have the original development plans right here. I'll be sending you a formal notice that you have 30 days to remove this structure, or the HOA will remove it for you and bill you for the costs." "You're insane," I said flatly. "I'm following the bylaws," she shot back. "And furthermore, as this is technically community space, I'll be organizing a community gathering here this Saturday. We'll be having our fall HOA meeting right here in this space. I expect you to extinguish that fire pit and move all your personal belongings inside." She turned on her heel and marched out of my yard before I could respond, leaving me staring at the gate in disbelief. I had dealt with Patricia's power trips before. She had cited me for leaving my trash cans out 15 minutes past the pickup time, complained that my house number wasn't the approved font, and tried to fine me for parking my work truck in my own driveway. But this was a new level of absurdity. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, Marcus Wellington, who had helped me navigate previous HOA disputes. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Quincy, please tell me Patricia hasn't invented a new way to make your life hell," Marcus said with a weary chuckle. "She claims my fire pit is on community property and wants to hold an HOA meeting in my backyard this Saturday." There was a long pause. "She what now?" I explained the entire bizarre conversation while Marcus listened with increasing interest. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You still have your survey documents from when you built the fire pit?" "Of course. I kept everything." "Good. And your property deed, the title insurance, all of it?" "Everything." "Why?" "Because I think Patricia might have finally crossed a line that's going to cost her. Send me everything you have and I'll review it tonight. But Quincy, don't do anything rash. If she shows up on Saturday with people, let her. Document everything. This could actually work in our favor." After I hung up with Marcus, I sat by the fire for another hour, my peaceful evening thoroughly ruined. I had moved to this subdivision in Scottsdale specifically because it was supposed to be a quiet, well-maintained community. The houses were beautiful Southwestern-style homes with terracotta roofs and desert landscaping. The streets were clean, the common areas were maintained, and property values were stable. But Patricia Hendricks had turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom, wielding power like a medieval tyrant. The next morning, I forwarded all my property documents to Marcus before heading to my current job site in Temp. I managed commercial construction projects, which meant my days were filled with dealing with subcontractors, inspectors, and the occasional crisis. It was stressful work, but it paid well and I was good at it. What I didn't need was coming home to more stress from my own HOA. My phone rang around 11 that morning. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "Tell me good news," I answered, stepping away from the concrete pour we were monitoring. "Better than good. Quincy, your property line extends exactly where your fence is. I've reviewed your survey, your deed, and I even pulled the county records. There's absolutely no ambiguity. That fire pit is squarely on your property, probably a good 8 feet from the property line." So what's Patricia looking at? That's where it gets interesting. I did some digging and found the original 1987 development plans she's probably referencing. There was indeed a designation for green space in that general area, but it was revised in 1991 when the developer expanded the lots before selling them. Your property deed reflects the revised boundaries. Patricia either has outdated information or she's deliberately misrepresenting the facts. Knowing Patricia, it's probably the latter. "Here's what I suggest," Marcus continued. "Let her have her little meeting on Saturday. Let her show up with whoever she brings. And then you show her your property tax bill, your deed, and your survey. Do it publicly in front of witnesses. If she's claiming HOA ownership of your property, we might have grounds for harassment charges. What about her threat to remove my fire pit? Empty threat. If anyone touches your fire pit without your permission, that's destruction of property and trespassing. I'll draft a letter to the HOA board putting them on notice, but I think this situation is going to resolve itself on Saturday." Friday afternoon, I received an official email from the HOA with the subject line, "Community Meeting Notice." Patricia had sent it to every resident in the subdivision, announcing that the fall HOA meeting would be held at the community green space behind 4472 Sagaro Drive, which was my address. The email included a lengthy explanation about how she had discovered this forgotten community space and wanted to reclaim it for neighborhood use. My phone started ringing within minutes. My next-door neighbor, an elderly veteran named George Mitchum, called first. "Quincy, what the hell is Patricia talking about? Your backyard isn't community space." "I know, George. She's on some kind of power trip." "This is insane even for her," George said. "Half the neighborhood is talking about it. Some people think you've been illegally squatting on HOA property." "Let them think what they want. The truth will come out tomorrow." More neighbors called throughout the evening, some supportive, others accusatory. I recognized Patricia's strategy. She was turning public opinion against me before I had a chance to defend myself. It was a calculated move to make me look like the bad guy. Saturday morning arrived with typical Arizona sunshine, the temperature already climbing toward the low 90s by 10 o'clock. Patricia had announced the meeting for 11, and I spent the morning preparing. I printed out my property deed, my survey documents, 3 years of property tax bills clearly showing my lot boundaries, and my title insurance policy. Marcus had sent over an additional letter from a licensed surveyor confirming my property lines. I had everything organized in a folder, and I set up my phone to record video. At 10:45, Patricia arrived with an entourage. She had brought 2 card tables, folding chairs, and at least 15 people. I recognized most of them as HOA committee members and their spouses. Susan Richardson was there, of course, carrying a clipboard and wearing a self-righteous expression. Behind them came another dozen residents who were apparently curious about this mysterious community space. I was sitting on my patio, my folder of documents on the table beside me, watching as they filed through my back gate. "Good morning, Patricia," I called out pleasantly. She ignored me completely, directing her people to set up the tables and chairs near my fire pit. "Everyone, please take a seat. We have a lot to cover today. As you can see, this beautiful green space has been sadly neglected for years, but we're going to change that." George Mitchum had come through my side gate, refusing to participate in Patricia's theatrical entrance. He sat down next to me with his own cup of coffee and muttered, "This should be entertaining." More residents trickled in, some looking confused about the setup. Jennifer Martinez, a nurse who lived 3 houses down, approached me directly. "Quincy, is this really community property? I always thought this was your yard." "It is my yard, Jennifer. You'll see." Patricia called the meeting to order, standing in front of my fire pit like she owned the place. She launched into a prepared speech about community values, shared spaces, and the importance of following the original vision of the neighborhood founders. She pulled up images on her tablet showing the 1987 development plans, projecting them onto a portable screen someone had set up. "As you can see," Patricia declared, pointing at the grainy image, "this area was always intended to be a community gathering space. Unfortunately, one resident decided to build a personal fire pit on property that belongs to all of us. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior that erodes community values." Several people glanced at me uncomfortably. Others nodded along with Patricia's narrative. "Now, I've given Mr. Voss 30 days to remove this structure," Patricia continued. "But given the size of our community and our shared interest in this space, I thought we should all discuss how we want to use this area once it's restored to its proper purpose. Should we install playground equipment? Perhaps a community garden? I'm open to suggestions." That's when I stood up. "Patricia, before everyone starts planning gardens and playgrounds, maybe we should clarify something important. Mr. Voss, you're out of order. This is an HOA meeting and you haven't been recognized to speak. This is my private property and you're all trespassing," I said calmly, holding up my folder. "But since you're here, let me show everyone some documents." The crowd went silent. Patricia's face flushed red. "You're disrupting an official HOA meeting. George, would you mind helping me hand these out?" I pulled out copies I had made of my property deed and survey. George took half the stack with a grin and started distributing them to the confused residents. "What you're holding," I explained as people looked down at the papers, "is my property deed and a certified survey from 2024. As you can see, my property line extends to the fence line on all sides. This fire pit sits approximately 8 feet inside my property boundary. Patricia snatched one of the papers from Susan's hands, her eyes scanning it frantically. These could be forged. They're not forged, Patricia. They're certified documents from the county recorder's office. You can verify them yourself. I pulled out my phone and opened my video recording app. But let me show you something else. I walked over to my fence line where a metal survey marker was embedded in the ground. See this? This is a permanent survey marker placed by a licensed surveyor. My property extends from this marker all the way to the fence on the other side. Every inch of this yard is mine. Jennifer Martinez stood up, looking at her copy of the deed. Patricia, this deed is dated 1993. It clearly shows the lot boundaries include this entire area. The original plans from 1987 say otherwise, Patricia insisted, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. The original plans were revised in 1991, I said. The developer expanded these lots before selling them. Patricia, you're looking at outdated documents and claiming they supersede recorded property deeds. They don't. An older man I didn't recognize well, Robert Chen from the next street over, raised his hand. Patricia, do you have documentation showing the HOA owns this property? Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The original development plans clearly indicate this was green space. But was it ever deeded to the HOA? Robert pressed. Because if it wasn't, and if Mr. Voss has a deed showing he owns it, then we're all sitting on his private property right now. This is ridiculous, Patricia sputtered. The HOA has authority over community spaces. But this isn't a community space, George interjected. Quincy's shown us his deed. Unless you have a deed showing the HOA owns this land, you don't have a leg to stand on. I pulled out my property tax bills next, holding them up for everyone to see. And just to make this crystal clear, here are 3 years of property tax bills in my name, showing this exact lot with these exact boundaries. I pay taxes on every square foot of this land, including where my fire pit sits. The county recognizes this as my property. The state of Arizona recognizes this as my property. And unless the HOA wants to start paying my property taxes, I suggest you all recognize it as my property too. The silence that followed was deafening. Residents were exchanging glances, looking down at the documents, and then looking at Patricia with expressions ranging from confusion to anger. Several people stood up and started folding their chairs. Wait, Patricia called out desperately. We still need to have our meeting. We have important HOA business to discuss. Have it somewhere else, I said flatly. You're on my private property and I'm asking you to leave. You have 5 minutes to pack up your things and get out, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. You can't do that, Patricia protested. Yes, he can, Robert Chen said, already carrying his chair toward the gate. Patricia, you screwed up. You brought all these people here under false pretenses. I don't know if you genuinely misunderstood the property records, or if you're on some kind of power trip, but either way, this meeting is over. The exodus was swift. Within minutes, my backyard was empty except for Patricia, Susan, and George, who had stayed behind to watch the drama unfold. Patricia stood by my fire pit, her face red and her hands shaking with rage or embarrassment, possibly both. This isn't over, she hissed at me. I'll take this to the HOA board. I'll review every single permit you pulled for this fire pit. I'll find something you did wrong. Patricia, you need to leave now, I said firmly. And for the record, my attorney will be filing a harassment complaint against you with the HOA board. This is the 4th time in 3 years you've targeted me with baseless accusations. Harassment. I'm enforcing community standards. You're abusing your position as HOA president to harass a resident you don't like. There's a difference. Susan tugged on Patricia's arm. Come on, Patricia. Let's go. Patricia shook her off but did finally head toward the gate. She turned back once to glare at me. You think you're so smart, but everyone in this neighborhood knows what kind of person you are. Selfish, arrogant, and completely unwilling to contribute to community life. I contribute just fine, I replied. I pay my dues, I follow the actual rules, and I mind my own business. You should try it sometime. After they left, George let out a low whistle. That was quite a show. Think she'll back off now? Honestly, I doubt it. She's too invested in being right. George nodded grimly. You might want to get security cameras if you don't have them already. People like Patricia don't take public humiliation well. He was right, of course. I ordered a comprehensive security system that afternoon, including cameras covering my entire backyard, front yard, and driveway. The installation was scheduled for Tuesday, but I also set up temporary motion-activated cameras from my garage right away. Sunday passed quietly, but Monday morning brought a new development. I received a certified letter from the HOA demanding I appear before the Architectural Review Committee to address unauthorized modifications to my property. The letter claimed my fire pit had been built without proper HOA approval and demanded I submit architectural plans, proof of permits, and a detailed justification for the structure. I forwarded the letter to Marcus immediately. He called me back within an hour, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. This is retaliation, pure and simple. Do you have your building permits for the fire pit? Of course. I pulled every required permit from the city. I even had the HOA Architectural Committee approve the plans before I started construction. I have the approval letter somewhere in my files. Find it. And Quincy, I think it's time we went on the offensive. Patricia's behavior has crossed from annoying to potentially illegal. She's harassing you. She made false claims about property ownership, and now she's retaliating against you for embarrassing her. We might have grounds for a lawsuit. I don't want to sue the HOA, I said. Most of my neighbors are decent people. It's just Patricia that's the problem. Then we target Patricia specifically. We can file a complaint with the HOA board requesting her removal as president based on her conduct. We can also send her a cease and desist letter personally, putting her on notice that further harassment will result in legal action. Let's do it. That afternoon, I found my HOA architectural approval letter from 2 years prior. The document was signed by the Architectural Committee chairman, a man named Donald Frazier, who had since moved out of the neighborhood. The approval was clear and unambiguous. Application for stone fire pit installation at 4472 Sagaro Drive, approved subject to compliance with city fire codes and setback requirements. I scanned the document and sent it to Marcus along with all my building permits. By Wednesday, Marcus had drafted a comprehensive response to the HOA's demand letter and a formal complaint to the board of directors calling for Patricia's removal as president. The complaint was detailed and damning. Marcus had documented every instance of Patricia's harassment over the past 3 years, including the trash can incident, the house number font debacle, the work truck parking complaint, and now the fire pit property dispute. He included witness statements from George and Jennifer Martinez, both of whom had submitted written accounts of Patricia's behavior. The complaint accused Patricia of abuse of authority, harassment, retaliation, and misuse of HOA resources for personal vendettas. Marcus also sent a cease and desist letter directly to Patricia's home address, warning her that any further contact with me regarding HOA matters must go through the board of directors, not directly from her. The letter made clear that her conduct was being documented, and that legal action was being prepared if it continued. The response was explosive. Thursday morning, I woke up to find my trash cans knocked over and garbage strewn across my driveway. My temporary security cameras had captured everything. At 3:15 in the morning, a figure wearing dark clothing and a hood had walked up my driveway, tipped over both cans, and kicked garbage across the pavement before walking away. The person was clearly trying to hide their identity, but one of my cameras had caught a clear shot of their face when they turned toward the street light. It was Susan Richardson. I immediately downloaded the footage and sent it to Marcus and to the Scottsdale Police Department's non-emergency line to file a report. An officer came by that afternoon to take my statement and review the footage. Officer Jennifer Kowalski was a no-nonsense woman in her mid-30s who took one look at the video and shook her head. "This is clearly intentional vandalism. Do you know this woman, Susan Richardson? She lives on Mesquite Lane, a few streets over. She's the secretary for our HOA, and she's close friends with the HOA president who I've been having disputes with. So this could be retaliation." I explained the entire situation, from Patricia's false claims about my property to the confrontation Saturday to the cease and desist letter. Officer Kowalski took detailed notes. "Mr. Voss, I'm going to pay Miss Richardson a visit this afternoon. Given that we have clear video evidence, she'll likely be cited at minimum. Depending on her attitude, I might recommend charges." "I just want it to stop," I said honestly. "I want to live in my house peacefully without constantly dealing with HOA drama." "I understand. But understand this too. People who engage in this kind of behavior usually escalate if they're not stopped. Document everything, keep your cameras running, and don't hesitate to call if anything else happens." After Officer Kowalski left, I spent an hour cleaning up my driveway and checking the rest of my property for damage. Everything else appeared untouched, but I felt violated nonetheless. This was my home, my sanctuary, and now I couldn't even feel safe here. That evening, George came over with a six-pack of beer and a grim expression. Susan Richardson was just escorted from her house by police. The whole street saw it. "What happened?" I showed him the security footage. George watched in disgust as Susan vandalized my property. "These women have lost their minds," he said. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and I've watched Patricia turn the HOA into her personal kingdom, but I never thought she'd go this far or drag Susan into it." "I think Susan went into it willingly," I said. "Nobody forced her to trash my driveway at 3 in the morning." "True enough. Listen, Quincy, you should know that a bunch of us are planning to attend the next HOA board meeting. We're going to demand Patricia's resignation. This has gone too far, and it's making the whole neighborhood look bad." The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and I had every intention of being there. Marcus had filed our formal complaint the day before, so the board was required to address it during the meeting. Friday brought more developments. Susan Richardson was charged with criminal trespassing and criminal damage, both misdemeanors. She was also cited for violating Scottsdale's municipal code regarding illegal dumping. The total fines came to nearly $800, plus she would have to appear in court. Patricia sent out an emergency email to the HOA claiming Susan had been falsely accused, and that the charges were part of a campaign of harassment against HOA leadership. The email was so over the top that several neighbors forwarded it to me with messages of disbelief. Saturday afternoon, I had my professional security system installed. The technician who did the work, A guy named Tommy, who had been in the business for 15 years, took one look at my temporary cameras and the footage I showed him and whistled. "Man, you've got yourself a real neighborhood situation here. I've done installations for people with HOA problems before, but this is next level. We're going to set you up with a system that covers every angle. If anyone comes onto your property, you'll have 4K footage and audio." The installation took most of the day, but when it was done, I had comprehensive coverage of my entire property, cloud backup of all footage, and a monitoring app on my phone that would alert me to any motion detected on my property. Sunday was quiet, and I spent most of the day catching up on work emails and preparing for a big project kickoff meeting scheduled for Monday morning. But my mind kept drifting to Tuesday's HOA board meeting and what might happen there. Monday at work, I received a call from Marcus. "Quincy, you need to see something. Patricia submitted a formal response to our complaint to the board, and it's completely delusional. She's claiming you've been harassing her, that you deliberately built your fire pit on disputed property to provoke conflict, and that you've been organizing other residents against her. She's even claiming the property records you showed everyone are somehow fraudulent, though she provides zero evidence for that claim. Can she actually claim public records are fraudulent? She can claim anything she wants, but it doesn't make it true. The problem is, if enough board members believe her or want to avoid conflict, they might try to sweep this whole thing under the rug. We need to be prepared to apply pressure. George said a bunch of neighbors are planning to show up Tuesday night. Good. Public pressure is exactly what we need. I'll be there too, representing you formally. Patricia's going to have to answer some hard questions." Tuesday evening arrived with an unusual tension in the air. The HOA board meetings were typically held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood's main entrance that served as a gathering space for events. The meetings usually drew maybe 10 people at most, mostly board members and 1 or 2 interested residents. Tonight was different. When I arrived 15 minutes before the 7 o'clock start time, the parking lot was already full. I had to park on the street and walk back. Inside the community center, every seat was taken and people were standing along the walls. I counted at least 60 residents, maybe more. George waved me over to where he had saved a seat. "This is unprecedented. I've never seen this many people at a board meeting." Marcus arrived moments later, carrying his briefcase and wearing the confident expression of an attorney who knew he had a strong case. He took a seat on my other side and leaned over to whisper, "This is good. Whatever happens, Patricia's going to know she's lost the neighborhood's support." The board of directors sat at a long table at the front of the room. There were 5 members: Patricia Hendricks as president, Susan Richardson as secretary, and 3 other members I knew less well. Thomas Wu was the treasurer, a quiet accountant who usually went along with whatever Patricia wanted. Margaret Flynn was vice president, a retired school teacher who seemed more interested in community events than governance. And David Porter was a member at large who had always struck me as the most reasonable of the bunch. Patricia called the meeting to order, but before she could launch into the usual procedural matters, David Porter interrupted her. "Patricia, before we begin with regular business, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. We've received a formal complaint requesting your removal as president, and given the attendance tonight, I think it's clear the community wants to hear about this situation." Patricia's face tightened. "That complaint is baseless and motivated by personal animosity. I don't think we should waste the board's time discussing frivolous allegations." "Frivolous?" A voice rang out from the crowd. Jennifer Martinez stood up, holding a copy of my property deed. Patricia, you made false claims about a resident's property ownership and tried to hold an HOA meeting on his private land. That's not frivolous. That's a serious abuse of authority. Several people applauded. Patricia's face flushed red. Miss Martinez, you're out of order. This is not an open forum. Actually, Patricia, I think we need to make it one tonight, Margaret Flynn said quietly. David's right. The community deserves to hear about this. Thomas Wu looked uncomfortable but nodded. Even Susan Richardson, despite her loyalty to Patricia, remained silent. Marcus stood up. Madam President, members of the board, my name is Marcus Wellington, and I represent Quincy Voss. I've submitted a formal complaint detailing a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority by Miss Hendricks. Rather than summarize it myself, I'd like to let Mr. Voss speak to the community directly about what he's experienced. Patricia tried to object, but David Porter overruled her. I think we should hear from Quincy. The floor is yours, Mr. Voss. I stood up, my heart pounding but my mind clear. I had prepared for this moment. Thank you. I moved to this neighborhood 3 years ago because it seemed like a great community. Beautiful homes, good neighbors, well-maintained common areas. But almost immediately, I began having problems with Miss Hendricks. I walked through each incident chronologically. The trash can citation for being 15 minutes late, the house number font complaint, the work truck parking issue, and finally, the fire pit debacle. As I spoke, I pulled out documentation for each incident, passing copies to the board and to residents in the crowd. Last Saturday, I continued, Miss Hendricks showed up in my backyard and claimed my fire pit was built on community property. She announced she would hold an HOA meeting in my backyard and invited the entire neighborhood. When I showed her my property deed, my survey, and my tax bills proving the land is mine, she refused to accept it. Since then, I've received a retaliatory demand letter questioning permits I properly obtained 2 years ago. And 3 nights ago, Miss Richardson, your secretary, was caught on my security cameras vandalizing my property at 3 in the morning. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Many people hadn't heard about Susan's arrest yet. Susan stood up, her face pale. That's not fair. I was upset. I made a mistake. You committed a crime, George called out from his seat. There's a difference. Order, David Porter called out, but his voice lacked authority. The meeting had become a pressure cooker of community frustration. I continued. I'm not here to attack Miss Hendricks personally, but her behavior as HOA president has been inappropriate, retaliatory, and frankly, unhinged. She has weaponized her position to target residents she doesn't like, wasted HOA resources on frivolous complaints, and made false legal claims about property ownership. This isn't leadership. This is bullying. The applause that followed was substantial. At least 2/3 of the room was clapping. Patricia sat frozen at the board table, her mouth a thin line. Marcus stood up again. Members of the board, the complaint we filed includes witness statements, documentation of every incident, and a legal analysis of Miss Hendricks's conduct. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. We're asking for accountability. If Miss Hendricks remains as president, we will be forced to pursue legal remedies, which will be costly for the HOA and potentially result in increased dues for everyone. Is that a threat? Patricia finally spoke, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. It's a statement of fact, Marcus replied calmly. Miss Hendricks, you've exposed this HOA to significant legal liability. You made false claims about property ownership in writing, sent to the entire community. You've engaged in a documented pattern of harassment, and your closest ally on the board has been arrested for vandalizing Mr. Voss's property. These are facts, not opinions. Thomas Wu cleared his throat. I think we need to take this seriously. Patricia, I've supported you on a lot of things over the years, but this situation is untenable. You were wrong about Quincy's property. The documents don't lie. Thomas, you can't possibly believe, Patricia started, but Margaret Flynn cut her off. Patricia, I think you need to resign. Tonight. Before this gets any worse for you or the HOA. The room erupted. Some people cheered. Others started talking amongst themselves. Patricia looked like she might explode. I will not resign, she declared, standing up and gripping the edge of the table. This is a coordinated attack by a troublemaker who has refused to respect community standards from day one. Quincy Voss has been a problem since he moved here. He parks his commercial vehicle in his driveway in violation of our standards. He refuses to participate in community events. He built an oversized fire pit without proper consideration for his neighbors. And now he's hired a lawyer to bully me into resigning because I dared to enforce our rules. Patricia, he has documentation showing he followed every rule, Jennifer Martinez called out. You're just making stuff up now. Robert Chen stood up from the back of the room. I move that the board vote tonight on whether to remove Patricia Hendricks as president based on the documented complaints against her. I second that motion, George added immediately. David Porter looked at Patricia, then at the crowd, then back at his fellow board members. That's not standard procedure, but given the circumstances, I think we need to address this tonight. Patricia, you have a right to defend yourself. Do you have anything to say? Patricia's hands were shaking now. She looked out at the crowd, seeing dozens of hostile faces, and seemed to realize for the first time that she had lost. You people don't understand what it takes to maintain a community like this. You don't see the work I do, the hours I spend reviewing applications and enforcing standards. All you see is when someone gets their feelings hurt because they can't do whatever they want. We understand leadership, Margaret Flynn said quietly, and this isn't it. Patricia, please. Make this easy on yourself and resign. No, Patricia said flatly. If you want me gone, you'll have to vote me out. David Porter nodded slowly. All right then. I call for a vote of the board on whether to remove Patricia Hendricks from her position as president of the HOA, effective immediately. All in favor. Margaret Flynn's hand went up immediately. David Porter raised his own hand. Thomas Wu hesitated for a long moment, then raised his hand as well. All opposed. Patricia's hand shot up. Susan Richardson, looking miserable, also raised her hand. The motion carries 3-2, David Porter announced. Patricia, I'm sorry, but you're no longer president of this HOA. Margaret, as vice president, you'll assume the presidency until we can hold elections. Patricia stood there for a moment, her face cycling through shock, rage, and something that might have been grief. Then she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the community center without another word. Susan Richardson scrambled after her, leaving her secretary materials scattered across the table. The room broke into applause and conversation. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. That went better than I expected, he said. Though I've got to tell you, Patricia's parting comments about you violating rules might mean she's not done causing problems. He was right to be cautious. Over the next few days, Patricia sent multiple emails to residents claiming she had been illegally removed from office and encouraging people to challenge the board's decision. She posted lengthy rants on the neighborhood's social media page about mob rule and personal vendettas. She even contacted a local news station claiming she was the victim of a coordinated conspiracy. The news station actually sent a reporter to interview several residents, including me. I showed the reporter my property documents, explained the situation calmly, and let the facts speak for themselves. When the story aired, it was a brief segment about HOA disputes that portrayed Patricia as an overzealous board member who had made mistakes and been voted out by her fellow board members. It wasn't the vindication of her crusade she had been hoping for. Susan Richardson pleaded guilty to the criminal charges against her and was sentenced to probation, community service, and restitution to cover my cleaning costs and the time I spent dealing with the vandalism. As part of her plea agreement, she also resigned from all HOA positions and agreed not to seek any HOA leadership role for 5 years. Margaret Flynn proved to be a capable and reasonable HOA president. One of her first actions was to schedule a comprehensive review of HOA policies and procedures to prevent future abuses of authority. She also personally apologized to me for what I had endured and assured me that the Architectural Review Committee's demand letter had been formally withdrawn and removed from my HOA record. I thought that would be the end of it, but Patricia had one more card to play. 3 weeks after her removal from the board, I received notice that I was being sued. Patricia had filed a personal lawsuit against me claiming defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to damage her reputation. The complaint was 30 pages of rambling accusations, half-truths, and outright fabrications. Marcus read through it with increasing disbelief. This is one of the most frivolous lawsuits I've ever seen. She's claiming you conspired with other residents to destroy her reputation through false allegations. But Quincy, everything we presented was documented fact. Can she actually sue me for telling the truth? She can file whatever she wants. Whether it survives a motion to dismiss is another matter. But we need to take this seriously because even frivolous lawsuits cost time and money to defend. Marcus filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit as meritless, arguing that truth was an absolute defense to defamation, and that I had done nothing more than exercise my legal rights to defend my property and petition for redress of grievances. The motion included all the documentation we had presented to the HOA board, plus additional evidence of Patricia's misconduct. The hearing on the motion was scheduled for a Monday morning in early December. I took the day off work to attend, meeting Marcus at the Maricopa County Superior Courthouse in downtown Phoenix. The courthouse was an imposing modern building, and I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach as we went through security and made our way to the courtroom. Patricia was already there with her attorney, a middle-aged man named Richard Bowers who looked uncomfortable with his client. I later learned from Marcus that Bowers had a reputation as a competent attorney, which meant he probably knew exactly how weak Patricia's case was. Judge Elizabeth Morrison presided over the hearing. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense in her courtroom. She reviewed both the complaint and our motion to dismiss before the hearing began, and when she called the case, her expression suggested she had already formed an opinion. "Mr. Bowers," Judge Morrison began, "I've reviewed your client's complaint and the defendant's motion to dismiss. I have to say, this appears to be a textbook example of a strategic lawsuit against public participation, or SLAPP suit. Your client appears to be using the legal system to retaliate against someone who exercised his legitimate rights. Can you explain why this court should allow this case to proceed?" Bowers stood up, and I could see the resignation in his posture. "Your Honor, my client genuinely believes she was defamed when the defendant made public statements at an HOA meeting and to other residents claiming she had abused her authority and engaged in harassment." "Did the defendant make false statements?" Judge Morrison asked pointedly. My client disputes the characterization of her actions. That's not what I asked. Did the defendant make factually false statements, or did he present documented evidence of actions your client actually took? Bowers hesitated. The defendant presented documents, but my client believes the context and characterization were misleading. Mr. Bowers, I've reviewed the evidence submitted with the motion to dismiss. I've seen property deeds, tax bills, surveys, and contemporaneous documentation of every incident the defendant described. I've also reviewed the video evidence of Miss Richardson vandalizing the defendant's property, which directly corroborates his claims about retaliation. Where exactly is the defamation? Your Honor, beyond the defamation claim, my client has suffered severe emotional distress from this ordeal. She was publicly humiliated and removed from a position she held for 6 years. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. She was removed by a vote of her fellow board members after they determined she had abused her authority. That's not infliction of emotional distress. That's accountability. Mr. Wellington, I assume you have a response. Marcus stood, and I could tell he was trying not to smile. Your Honor, this lawsuit is indeed a slap suit designed to punish my client for exercising his constitutional rights to defend his property and petition for redress of grievances. Miss Hendricks made demonstrably false claims about property ownership, engaged in a documented pattern of harassment, and when confronted with evidence of her misconduct, retaliated by filing this meritless lawsuit. Arizona has strong anti-slap protections, and we're asking this court to not only dismiss this case, but to award attorney fees and sanctions against Miss Hendricks. Judge Morrison nodded. I'm inclined to grant the motion to dismiss. Miss Hendricks, I'm going to address you directly. You need to understand that you cannot use the court system to punish people for telling the truth about your actions, especially when those actions were taken in your official capacity as an HOA president. The evidence is overwhelming that Mr. Voss acted properly in defending his property rights and that he presented truthful information to his community. Filing this lawsuit was not only inappropriate, it was sanctionable conduct. Patricia stood up suddenly. Your Honor, he destroyed my reputation. I can't even go to the grocery store without people whispering about me. I've lived in that neighborhood for 12 years, and now I'm treated like a pariah. Miss Hendricks, sit down, Judge Morrison said sharply. You destroyed your own reputation through your actions. You made false claims about property ownership. You retaliated against a resident. Your associate criminally vandalized his property. Those are facts, not defamation. Mr. Bowers, I'm dismissing this case with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney fees to the defendant in the amount to be determined by submission of proper documentation. I'm also sanctioning Miss Hendricks in the amount of $5,000 for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. This court will not be used as a weapon for personal vendettas. The gavel came down, and it was over. Patricia burst into tears, and Bowers put his hand on her shoulder, speaking to her in low tones. Marcus and I left the courtroom quietly, waiting until we were in the hallway before saying anything. That was about as complete a victory as you can get, Marcus said. The judge absolutely destroyed her case, and the sanctions, plus attorney fees, are going to cost Patricia significantly. I almost feel bad for her, I admitted. She's clearly not well. Don't feel too bad. She brought all of this on herself, and maybe now she'll finally leave you alone. Marcus was right. After the lawsuit was dismissed, Patricia went quiet. I later heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had put her house up for sale and was planning to move to a different community. Susan Richardson had already moved out, unable to handle the shame of her arrest, and the criminal conviction on her record. The HOA under Margaret Flynn's leadership became exactly what it should have been: a functional organization that maintained common areas, enforced reasonable standards fairly, and stayed out of residents' personal business. The Architectural Review Committee was reformed with clear guidelines and appeal processes. The board established term limits for officers and implemented transparency measures to prevent future abuses of power. In March, I received a check from Patricia's attorney for $8,500, representing my attorney fees and the sanctions the judge had awarded. Marcus had submitted detailed billing records, and Judge Morrison had approved the full amount. I used part of that money to upgrade my landscaping, and the rest went into savings. One warm evening in April, I was sitting by my fire pit with a group of neighbors who had become actual friends through this whole ordeal. George was there, along with Jennifer Martinez, Robert Chen, and several others. We were grilling burgers and enjoying the spring weather. "You know," George said, raising his beer in a toast, "I've got to hand it to you, Quincy. You stood up to Patricia when a lot of us were too intimidated to say anything. You changed this whole community for the better." "I just wanted to enjoy my fire pit in peace," I said with a laugh. "And now you can," Jennifer added. Although I have to say, after everything that happened, this fire pit has become kind of legendary in the neighborhood. Kids call it the fire pit that defeated the HOA. We all laughed at that. It felt good to sit on my own property with friends, without any fear of some HOA tyrant showing up to make my life miserable. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. "So did Patricia end up moving?" Robert asked. "I heard she closed on a house in Chandler last week," George said. "Some retirement community with even stricter HOA rules. I give it 6 months before she's in trouble with that board too." "That's her problem now," I said. "I'm just glad she's gone." Margaret Flynn stopped by later that evening, declining a burger but accepting a soda. She had come to give me an update on HOA business that I actually cared about for once. "The board voted tonight to formally apologize to you in writing for everything that happened," she said. "We're also going to be featuring an article in next month's newsletter about property rights and the proper procedures for addressing disputes. We want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." "I appreciate that, Margaret. You've done a good job as president." "I'm trying." "But honestly, Quincy, you deserve a lot of credit too. A lot of people would have just moved rather than fight. You stood your ground and held us accountable. That takes courage." After she left, I sat by the fire long after everyone else had gone home, thinking about the past 7 months. It had been stressful, expensive, and emotionally draining. But it had also taught me something important. Standing up for yourself matters even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. My property was mine, clearly and legally. I had the deeds, the surveys, the tax bills, and now the court judgments to prove it. Patricia had tried to take that away through bluster, intimidation, and abuse of authority, but in the end, facts and truth had prevailed. The fire burned low as midnight approached, glowing embers pulsing with residual heat. I thought about all the evenings I would spend here in the future, all the gatherings with friends, all the quiet moments of peace. This fire pit represented more than just a nice outdoor feature now. It represented the principle that your home is your castle, and no HOA Karren can take that away from you just because she thinks she has the authority. I grabbed the hose and thoroughly doused the remaining embers, making sure everything was cold before I went inside. As I locked my back door and set my security system for the night, I smiled. Tomorrow would be a normal day. No HOA drama, no legal battles, No Patricia Hendricks showing up to ruin my evening. Just another peaceful day in my home, in my yard, with my fire pit sitting exactly where it belonged. Well within my property lines, on land I own, pay taxes on, and have every right to enjoy however I see fit. The end of Patricia's reign had restored something important to our community. The understanding that HOAs exist to serve residents, not to enable petty tyrants to exercise power over their neighbors. It was a lesson that came at a cost, but it was worth every penny and every moment of stress. Because now, when I sat by my fire pit on cool desert evenings, I could do so with complete peace of mind, knowing that I had stood up for my rights and won. And that feeling of security and ownership made every fire I lit that much warmer and more satisfying. 6 months later, I was sitting at my usual spot on a Saturday afternoon when my phone rang. It was Marcus, calling for the first time in months since our legal relationship had concluded successfully. "Quincy, you're not going to believe this," he said, amusement clear in his voice. "Try me. After everything with Patricia, I'll believe anything. I just got a call from an attorney in Chandler. Apparently, Patricia is already in trouble with her new HOA. She got herself elected to the board within 3 months of moving in, and now she's being sued by 3 different residents for harassment and abuse of authority. One of them heard about your case and reached out to me for advice. I couldn't help but laugh. Some people never learn. The attorney asked if you'd be willing to speak with his clients about your experience. I told him I'd ask. I thought about it for a moment. Sure, I'll talk to them. Maybe my experience can help someone else deal with their own HOA nightmare. That's what I thought you'd say. I'll send you the attorney's contact info. After we hung up, I thought about the strange trajectory my life had taken over the past year. I had moved to Scottsdale looking for a quiet place to live, ended up in a war with my HOA president, got dragged through months of conflict and even a lawsuit. And now, I was apparently becoming some kind of expert on dealing with abusive HOA leadership. Life had a funny way of working out. I had defended my property, stood up to a bully, and helped change my community for the better. And now my experience might help others going through similar situations. That felt like a kind of victory that went beyond just winning my specific battles with Patricia. The fire pit sat in the late afternoon sun, its stones warm to the touch, exactly where it had always belonged. On my property, installed with proper permits, approved by the HOA before Patricia decided to make it a battlefield. It had become a symbol not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood of the importance of standing up for what's right. George walked over from his house, carrying his usual 6-pack. "Firing up the pit tonight." "Absolutely. Spread the word." "I'm thinking we do burgers and hot dogs, make it a whole thing." "Sounds good." "Jennifer's bringing her famous potato salad. Robert said he'd bring drinks." As the sun set over Scottsdale, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that only Arizona can produce, my backyard filled with neighbors and friends. The fire pit blazed cheerfully in the center of it all, exactly where it should be, on property that was unquestionably, indisputably, and legally mine. Patricia Hendricks had tried to claim my fire pit was community space, tried to take away my property rights through intimidation and false claims. But I had shown her the property tax bill in my name, along with the deed, the survey, and ultimately the full force of the legal system that protects property owners from exactly that kind of overreach. And in the end, the fire pit remained, the property rights were vindicated, and the HOA was reformed. Justice, as it turned out, was best served warm by a crackling fire on a beautiful Arizona evening, surrounded by people who understood that protecting individual rights benefits the entire community. The flames danced higher as someone added more wood, and laughter filled my backyard. This was what home was supposed to feel like: safe, secure, and completely legally mine. No HOA Karren would ever take that away from me again.